Hello everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final module webinar for 2016. My name is Laura McFeely, and I'm a program associate at Interrise, which is the national curriculum provider for the program. So we hire the instructors in your local communities, and we also provide the curriculum. Sherif Ebrahim will be our presenter today, and he has been the Emerging Leaders Instructor in New Orleans since Emerging Leaders started in 2008. You can feel free to ask questions, and there's also a chat function if you would prefer to do that. And Sherif, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to take a different approach than we've been doing through the program so far. We're going to actually focus on solving a specific problem. So rather than looking at a lot of the big picture issues and going through the dynamics, we're going to try and go to the next level. So as a topic, as the title says, we're going to take a structured approach to effective strategy, and we're going to focus on how you can problem solve and take specific issues and break them down to achievable components to go to the next level. So the topics we're going to cover today are problem solving, decision-making approaches, the problem-solving cycle, and we'll talk about prioritizing as well. And please feel free to stop me as we go. So we're going to talk about the importance of good problem-solving and decision-making skills. The benefits are, as you can see, to get to the answers faster, to use our time and resources more efficiently, have greater impact on the business, and free up time to do other things. Time being another precious resource that a lot of people seem to not value nearly as much, especially in the startup phase. So our objectives for the session today are to introduce an approach and more specifically some tools you can add to your toolkit of skills and use for many types of problem solving. And the approach we're going to use are focusing on the key elements of this approach through the lecture and the discussion with our group today. So first I'd like to introduce something that I think gives us a good background. McKinsey has developed a problem-solving approach that involves logical problem-solving. One of the key pieces to it that they did in the process is they focus on what is impact-driven. They maintain a focus on the. I'm sorry, I just saw the chat. Am I not speaking loud enough? Is that better? Okay, I'll assume it's better. If not, please stop me and tell me. So in the logical problem-solving approach that McKinsey developed, they focused on three components that would be: number one, it needs to be impact-driven, it needs to be focused on outcome, and it needs to be fact-based. One of the things that they applied that most people initially pushed back was the elements of creative thinking, and then ultimately the focus on impact. And one of the things that we've done is we've taken that and we've built upon it, and so we developed the problem-solving cycle. And one of the things where you see in this problem-solving cycle is we're focused on, as leaders, we're focused on problem definition, problem structuring, prioritization, and synthesis. And the reason we don't focus as much on issue analysis and work plan analysis and recommendations is that there are other people that can be involved in this process, but the priority for the focus of leadership should be on these pieces. And as you see, it'll become more and more clear as we go on. So in this, what we're supposed to be doing is we're taking the problem and running it through this cycle and thinking in terms of an iterative process. So as we go, you'll see that first you need to define the problem. And what our focus should be first, foremost than anything else, is what is the impact? What's the question we're trying to answer? One thing I'd like to point out is the emphasis on communication through the whole process. Communication is not just the actual sharing of information, but also the agreement. One of the components that we talk about quite a bit is you want to reduce transaction cost economics. If I say I want the growth to be good, and my definition of growth to be good is 2%, and your definition of growth being good is 20%, then as we talk and we define things and as we structure and prioritize and analyze and synthesize and make recommendations, we're talking two different languages, and that's a transaction cost because of the lack of common definition. So one of the things is in the communication, it starts from problem to the impact or outcome, is making sure that we're defining things very specifically and being very clear on the metrics. So as we proceed, what's a good problem definition? And a lot of people struggle with this. One of the things in the problem definition is first recognizing that it's really a way to frame a problem so that we're clear on the front end what we're all trying to solve and what the success will look like. We're defining not just the problem, but we're defining what the actual solution would look like. Meaning if growth for us is growth of sales, or if growth for us is growth in net income or market share or in number of products or number of clients, all of that needs to be defined so we can measure success. And this ties to what we did in the growth planning process, where we focused on goals, and then we focused on metrics, and then we focused on methods, and then we focus on the resources that we need. So what are the characteristics of a good problem definition? Most of the people that you look at that are successful, the must-haves are ensuring that we get to the best answer. Notice I'm not saying the absolute best answer, but a successful answer that solves the problem. Ensure our answer is practical and implementable. And then we're going to talk about what are the common pitfalls. So here's a good idea. This is a good way to look at it, is we set up problem statements, and as we go through, we think about the problem in these components. So first, what are we trying to achieve? We ask ourselves, what are we trying to achieve, to focus ourselves on the work and ensure that the findings can be acted upon. If you can't implement, then it's just really stating what an issue is, but we're not really moving the organization to a resolution or to a correction of what we're trying to solve. So the more specific the statement, the better, provided that it's not so narrow that the wrong problem is addressed. So we don't want to break it down too low, and you'll understand that as we go through the process. First, we evaluate the background and the context. Excuse me. Comments on the situation and complication facing the key issue, example, the industry trends, regulatory issues, relative position in the industry, new market entrant, those type of things. Number two, what is success? How do we define it? It refers to the basis on which the key decision maker, or makers in this case, will decide whether to act on recommendations. So are we going to look at our financial return? Are we going to look on the effect on our staff? Whether we need to hire people, whether we need to hire different people. Do we need new expertise, or maybe we're looking for market share growth? Stakeholders. Stakeholders obviously are not just your shareholders, but they're also people that are associated with you. It could be your suppliers, it could be customers, it could be partners, it could be channel partners, or the government. It depends on what you're working on, how your approach to this, what's involved in this particular problem. So we first have to identify the primary decision makers, and as you can see, they're internal and external, and it also affects. It's a focus on implementation. One point I'd like to make at this part is you can use the same thing, applying it to your clients, applying it to your customers, and applying it to customer problems or developing new products or services. And this is another way that there's another methodology that you can use to do that. You also want to identify potential challenges, indicating what we will not include in the project. such as international markets, R&D activities, maybe a certain division. And what we're going to focus on is the 80-20 rule. We're not really focused on becoming exactly precise initially. What we're focused on is where the greatest impact for our efforts are, and I'll get into that later. And then finally, where will we find information and help? So what we want to do is recognize this is the components of resources. What are the things that we will need to actually implement and solve these problems? And you notice that some of this is not just having the people, but labor relations, how people perceive the problem, our communication practices, and even whether we're risk-prone or risk-averse. Our risk tolerance plays a big factor in whether or not we proceed and how we perceive issues and problems. Recognizing the basis that in all business, risk is essentially, it's a four-letter word, but it also can become the opportunity that we can leverage our resources to create value. So we'll go to an example, and I think this might become a little easier. If anyone would like to step in and ask questions, please feel free. If not, I'll continue. So one idea of what a good problem definition looks like is, what are we trying to achieve? The basic question is, what are we trying to solve? So you want to make sure it's specific, measurable, action-oriented, relevant, and time-bound, which should sound familiar because you'll see it's actually our goals. The background and context, the questions you want to ask are, what is the current situation? What has happened so far? Why is this a problem? Why is this problem being addressed now? Sorry for the typo. What is success, and how do we define that success? What does the final product or service look like? What are we trying to deliver? What are we trying to accomplish through here? Stakeholders are the means by which we'll have to get this done. Or these are the people that are either the gatekeepers or the people we have to convince it needs to be done. These are the people that we need to involve. It could be employees, it could be customers, partners, et cetera, as I've mentioned. So these are the type of questions we'll ask. Who are the decision makers? Who needs to be involved? Fourth, potential challenges. What are the potential issues or problems that we can foresee and plan to mitigate? And then finally, where will we find the information, and where does expertise and knowledge exist? This includes institutional knowledge. It includes knowledge of our partners, industry resources, publicly available information, governmental, et cetera. It also doesn't, if you notice, I'm not talking about information gathering, and that's a big part of this for moving very quickly. There's plenty of time for that in analysis later, but for now, it's finding publicly available or readily available information and data to move forward on the beginning process. So, as I've mentioned, characteristics of a good problem statement are very similar, almost exactly, to our goals statements. And those characteristics are, you also still have to have a specific, measurable, action-oriented, relevant, and time-bound problem statement, so we know exactly what we're trying to answer. Mm-hmm. I think I hear somebody. If you could mute your phone, please. Thank you. Okay, so a good example here is, let's take this company. So an example of a problem statement is oil co-refinery. So you can say that oil co-refinery is suffering from poor profitability despite a strong market niche position. So that's a statement of fact. So is that a smart problem statement? Well, not exactly, because we don't have a lot of the components that we've discussed. So each of these are not. So you could say, should oil co-refinery improve its deteriorating position? Well, it's not disputable. Of course, everybody wants to improve their problem position. So you try not to make it binary. And then, can oil co-refinery be managed differently to increase profitability? And that's, of course, too general. And you guys have all probably seen this and struggled with it yourselves in setting your goal statements, which are essentially form of problem statements. So here's a good example of a smart problem statement. And specifically, you'll notice what opportunities exist for oil co to improve profitability by 40% per year through overhead rationalization, operational improvements, or restructuring non-core assets. So you see it's specific, it's certainly measurable, it's action-oriented, it's relevant to the problem, and it's time-bound. Okay. So the next is we go to the next section, which is structuring the problem. And in this, what is a good way to think about it is disaggregation and hypothesis. What are the key elements of the problem? So what you want to do is you want to break it down. And what I mean by that is, what issues should we think about? What steps will we need to take? How will we build something? What other issues require us to answer the difficult questions associated with this problem? What are the core issues? So we introduced the concept of an issue tree, and an issue tree is basically a logic tree, and it's a good tool to break down a large problem into smaller pieces that are easier to manage and resolve and to try and digest or to even delegate to different components of your organization or your external partners even. So number one, you want to use the logic tree to break down a problem into its component parts. You want to ensure integrity of the problem solving is maintained through the whole process. To build a common understanding within the team of the problem-solving network. So this is that issue of transaction cost economics. You want everybody to be on the same page of how what framework we're using to solve the problem and what is the ultimate goal, and to help focus team efforts. So, for instance, if we had issue 5 is our accounting department focused on the billing processes, and they're working on this component, and sales is focusing on the sales and how we deal with that related to the issue. And then you have maybe manufacturing or a subcontractor here. What we want everybody to be focused on is ultimately getting to this is solving the main problem. It's not just doing this in a vacuum. So there's some level of coordination that needs to occur by leadership through this process to ensure that ultimately we're heading to the outcome, which is the impact that we defined earlier. So an issue tree is a valuable tool to disaggregate a problem into core sub-questions that need to be addressed and to answer the main question. And so what you do is you basically set up your issue tree, and you want to decompose an issue into smaller issues. So you want to use measures and criteria and different types of specifics to go through that process. You also want to set sub-issues so that you have within those sub-issues, you can begin to focus on the how and the what's and the whys. And what that begins to do is it begins to, again, break it down into achievable pieces that people can break and begin to try and resolve. It helps disaggregate the problem into individual pieces. I'm sorry, my arrow is a little too big. Helps divide the work among team members. And then when you use it, it's early in the problem-solving process, so when you know little about the problem. And the idea being that you may end up experiencing dead ends, and that's okay, but what you ultimately are trying to do is rule out things that you recognize are not pieces of the core problem, and you want to ultimately find maybe potentially some serendipitous learning that you didn't initially intend to find. So the basic principle of the issue tree is formulation of a basic question to be resolved and should be as specific as possible. You should also have complete but not overlapping list of conceivable solutions. So this is sort of like scenario thinking. You know, is it an accounting problem? Is it a sales problem? Is it a partnership problem? Is it a pricing problem? Further level of detail within pricing. Are we pricing too low? Are we not pricing the right products? Are we pricing too simply? In accounting, are we too rigid on our collection practices? Or are we too difficult on the types of methods of payment structures that we accept? In sales, are we over-promising and under-delivering? So the goal is to break the problem into component parts and show concrete solutions. Two goals in this. I've discussed the 80-20 rule. I'll briefly touch on it again. With 20% of your effort, you hopefully will achieve 80% of benefit for impact. So what this is basically showing you is spending the extra time trying to perfect is usually a game of diminishing returns. So initially, focus on the 20%. Focus on solving the problem, and then you can refine later. Now, this is an interesting concept that you may or may not have heard, and that's what we call MISI, which is mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. And what we're doing here is, if you remember the example of sales, maybe manufacturing, and maybe accounting, what you're really trying to do is make sure that you're focusing on these issues being mutually exclusive. So you're not discussing sales here with accounting. There's plenty of time to do that later when we break out, but what we want to do is look at these issues in isolation, but we want ultimately to get to a collectively exhaustive analysis. So what you see here is that the contents of the statements don't overlap, and the reason for them not to overlap is that's the mutually exclusive piece. But then you ultimately want to get to the point where all of this collectively is mutually exclusive. The other way around, mutually exclusive here and collectively exhaustive here. And together the statements answer the questions or fully describe the idea on the level immediately above it. I'm sorry if I confused. Does anybody have any questions there? Okay, I'll move on. So let's try an example. How do you reduce your monthly shopping expenses? So first, our question specifically, how could you reduce your expenditure each month? So number one is you could buy fewer items. That then focuses on food, clothing, entertainment, travel perhaps. Or you could pay less for the same quantity of items. So buy lower quality items, buy items at discount or on sale, share costs of items with someone else, like splitting your rent with roommates, carpooling, cost sharing of some sort. So as we go through, now we have to prioritize. And this is why we were focused on the 80-20 rule. Part of the problem here is you have to think in terms of speed, because what you want to ultimately do is move along to the impact quickly, and then you can always refine as we go. So which part of the tree is most important? Which part of the tree seems most important to the problem? Well, we need to determine that here, because what we're going to do is then we're going to start expending resources. And what we want to do is focus our resources on the highest impact. And that's where the 80-20 rule comes. That's where we allocate responsibilities to team members, and that's where we begin to begin the process of problem solving. So the purpose of prioritization is we have limited resources, so we want a bundle of possible actions developed, and we want to move as fast as we can. Back to the 80-20 rule, focusing on impact. Our time and effort, if we can spend 20% of our effort to focus on 80% impact, then go back and polish and focus the 80% of the remaining time for the rest of the 20%, that's a smarter way of rationalizing our resources. We also will prioritize based on using our judgment and our intuition. You have a general feel, you have institutional knowledge, you have experience, you have a general understanding and a gut feel based on years of experience in a particular field, or reading on it, or understanding the dynamics. Do back-of-the-envelope calculations. Basically what we're talking about is estimates. Take risks, and involve your team. One of the things that a lot of people fail to do in this is actually listening and engaging their team to find ways that their team may have solutions. You'd be surprised where the solutions reside. So methods for prioritizing. Take a reasonably quick, informal approach to getting started. Remember that sometimes a back-of-envelope calculation is all that's needed. If new information emerges, you can always reprioritize and switch your efforts to another part of the tree. Use likely impact to decide where to go first. Use readily available data whenever possible. Avoid major data requests, and do not create massive spreadsheets or other computer models if you can move forward with less complete information. Examples of these methods are percentage of total, rather than getting actual raw information, because you can always extrapolate later. Estimating potential increases or decreases using sensitivity analyses. using simple ratios. We learned in the program a lot of these things you'll see that you've actually done through your homework. Quick industry benchmarks, qualitative input from interviews, ease of implementation, timing, quick wins. The reason for quick wins is what you're really trying to do is to reinforce the process and to engage people that they feel that there's an impact. It's not window dressing. A lot of people think that that's what it is. What it really is it's showing some fruits for the labor, and so it begins to gain hold, and it begins to change the culture of how an organization views their problem-solving techniques. Evaluate your available resources, and then determine your risk tolerance and your comfort with risk, and whether this problem will create high risk or low risk, and what the benefits are, and engaging in a cost-benefit analysis. So moving on to the next step is the actual issue analysis in your work plan. So this is where you begin to focus on efficiency. How and on what should the team spend its time? Where should we focus specifically on developing next? And then we move on to evidence. What am I trying to prove or disprove? Am I trying to move in a specific direction? Am I truly just trying to learn something? Am I trying to improve something? What is it that I'm trying to really accomplish, and what does the data begin to tell me? What is the feedback I'm gaining tell me? And then this is where you reprioritize as a leader again. This is where you need to think, so what? Why is this important? What are the implications? So, okay, now we understand that our pricing model is wrong. Why does that matter? Okay, well, does it matter because we're not pricing things properly? Is it maybe that the pricing is not the issue, it's how we deliver it or how we position it? Maybe we're targeting the wrong customers with our pricing model, and we're specifically targeting the right customers, but the wrong customers are the ones that are complaining the most, and those aren't customers we wanted anyway, so it's actually being effective. Those are all considerable things to think of. But in the process of synthesis, what you want to do is build it on fact. So what we want to do is focus on the difference between summary and synthesis. And the first thing I'd say is, first, focus on your facts. So, for example, I've misplaced my keys. My passport isn't where I thought it was. I'm 2 months behind on my tax return. So if I look at summary, my summary is I've lost my keys and my passport, and I'm behind on my tax return. I've not learned anything new from there. I've not synthesized anything. What I want to learn is, what's my root cause? Well, I've been sloppy. I've been lazy. I haven't been organized. That's a synthesis. That's something I can learn about. So in order to understand this gives me something to actually focus on and try and improve and fix. So how do you develop a more powerful and effective main message? Well, one of the things that you want to do in synthesis is you want to focus on, what is the one thing I want my audience to think or do as a result of this communication? So what you want to do is, this is both internal and external audiences. So as a leader, what you want to do is focus on the message not being all over the place. So you want to focus on tops. That's targeted, overarching, not too caught in the weeds, powerful, something that they really are excited about or that they can really see and grasp, and supportable, something that's realistic and that they can get behind, that's not controversial, or if it is controversial, that it's manageable. Finally, you want to develop your final recommendations, and that's basically your potential solution and what should be done. And in the end, what we're really trying to do is basically create a cohesive method for how we're doing it. None of the things that I've discussed here today are going to be groundbreaking or earth-shattering or even rocket science. What we're really doing is just thinking of methods of organization and trying to find ways that create impact. With that, I'm finished with the presentation, but I'm more than happy to discuss questions and ask people if they're interested in having a conversation to discuss specific issues or to ask any general questions if they're interested.
Sherif.
Hey, Laura, is this going to be made available to us?
Yep, I will be posting the recording and the slides.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, that'll definitely help.
Okay.
Okay, well, I wish you all very much success, and if you have questions, certainly feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sherif.
Bye-bye.